In this chapter, we're going to be going over chapter 5, thinking about conflict. Now, in this chapter, we're going to be going over three key things. The idea of transactional analysis, we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on that. Assertiveness, and conflict management. In here, we'll talk about the various states of transactional analysis, the difference between passive-aggressive and assertive behaviors, and the steps to assertiveness. When to use conflict management steps, and then also what can you do as far as responding to and mediating any kind of conflict that you might experience. Transactional analysis is actually an old concept. It was started back in the 1960s. It was really kind of a pop psych type of thing where they were looking at ego states, types of transactions, and life positions. One of the things you probably want to do is do the self-assessment 5-1, looking at your preferred transactional analysis style. In TA, there's basically three major ego states, and they can change throughout the day or at the time. The thing is, we have a tendency to have one preference. You have parent, child, and adult. The parent has two ego states, okay? You have your critical and your sympathetic parent. The critical parent is making judgments, is very opinionated, lots of do's and don'ts. The sympathetic parent is more reassuring as far as what it is that they're doing and their responses. In the child ego state, there are two different childs. You have your natural child, which is basically full of joy and fun and fantasy and impulsiveness. The adaptive child is one that responds with aggression and confrontation, and rebelliousness. The key is the adult ego state. The adult ego state is basically responding with rational ideas, logic, things like this. They remain cool and calm. It's the most effective style of communication. In these various ego states, there are three types of transactions. You have complementary, where one comes across as expected from the other. You have crossed, where you have something where one was expecting an adult and they get a child or something like that. And then you have ulterior. In other words, the hidden agendas that go along with some of the messages that people might have. In TA, there's the idea of life positions and stroking. Life positions are basically saying, okay or not okay. I'm okay, you're okay, I'm not okay, you're not okay, that sort of thing. Stroking is recognition of the other person. It's a validation of the other person. I mean, we could have positive or negative strokes. Positive strokes are, praise and awards. Negative strokes are tearing people down, being hurtful. You have an assertiveness self-assessment, 5-2. You probably want to do that to get an idea as far as how assertive you tend to be as far as your natural state. When we start talking about assertiveness, there's basically several ways of going about it. Okay, you have passive behavior, aggressive behavior, and passive-aggressive. These are all inappropriate behaviors. The key is assertive behavior, not aggressive, but assertive. Passive behavior is basically saying, okay, I'm not okay as far as your life position. You think about the nonverbals, looking down, speaking softly, poor self-esteem, unhappy, things like this. It's very unproductive behavior. You have aggressive behavior, being rude, tough, demanding, and pushy. Again, it's coming from a not okay, I'm not okay life position, but you're trying to prove to others that you are okay by controlling them. Violating other people's rights in order to validate their own self-worth, things like this. Passive-aggressive is where you don't know who it is that you're dealing with. In other words, you're going to see people say one thing and then actually do another. It's like the meeting after the meeting. They might agree during the meeting. After the meeting, they disagree. Passive-aggressive types sometimes will come across and let it build up, and all of a sudden it just kind of explodes. And it's basically a real lose-lose as far as the interactions are concerned. The key is assertive behavior. Okay, it comes from that adult ego state. And what you're doing is protecting your own rights and not violating others. Think about the nonverbals, the smiling, the eye contact, and having a positive self-image of themselves. When it comes to being assertive, there's several things. First of all, you need to set an objective as far as what it is that you want. You need to figure out how to create a win-win. In other words, how can I create a win for me and for you? Develop assertive phrases. In other words, how do you come across as far as what it is that you say in being assertive? Well, I feel we really should do these things, or something along those lines can be assertive. You get to a point sometimes where there may be anger in the workplace and possibly even violence. And what we're going to do is talk about the causes, how to deal with it, and how to prevent it. The causes of anger could be psychological or physical issues. Psychological, in other words, somebody may be really frustrated at work about something, or maybe they're under a lot of stress. Violence, most times, is a retaliation of some sort, fighting or something along those lines. You could have physical issues, in other words, crowded workspaces, a hot location, or something like that. First of all, we have to learn how to deal with our own anger. I love this saying here by Buddha. You will not be punished for your anger, you will be punished by your anger. The thing is, you have to let it go. You might get angry about something, but let it go. Figure out a positive way of approaching things rationally. Find the positive in things. Try to find what it was that was good. What did you learn? Things like this. In dealing with the anger of others, the key is to not respond. Stay calm. Never, ever use any kind of put-down statements. What it does is it just puts people on the defensive. Don't give orders or ultimatums. Speak more softly. One of the things that happens is if you bring your vocal level down, it has a tendency to get the other person to start listening. Validate the other person's feelings. We talked in the last chapter about reflecting responses, empathic responses. So validate their feelings and things and what it is that they're, how they're coming across. Now, signs of potential violence. One of the things we need to do is be aware of where there could possibly be violence. In other words, any kind of verbal threats. Watch people's nonverbals. If you see any kind of stalking or harassment, get security involved. So one of the things we need to be aware of is how does violence actually come about? Be watching for it. Organizations need to do everything they can to prevent violence. And one of the key things is training people on how to deal with their anger, with their frustration, how to deal with people. Everybody needs to have the written policies and procedures in place as far as what happens if somebody does get violent in the workplace. There needs to be a zero tolerance policy. In other words, we will not allow this to happen. If it does happen, there needs to be immediate disciplinary action, all right? And we need to be screening people for any kind of past issues that they may have had. If we develop a good work environment, we're not going to have as many problems as possible. And if you are firing or laying off people, it should be handled as humanely as possible. Prevention is the key, all right? We need to keep in mind that there is always a potential for violence. And if there's somebody that we suspect that could be violent, we never want to be alone with them and know how to get away. Now, conflict. Conflict is basically just where you have some disagreement. All right, you're going to have conflict no matter what you're doing, no matter where you're at in organizations, in families, and things like that. It's not always negative. Many times, having a little conflict can get people motivated and actually find improved ways of doing things. There could be reasons, okay, for some of the negative conflict. All right, maybe we don't let others know exactly what we expect. Maybe we don't bother to find out what their expectations are. And it's possible to be in conflict with someone without even knowing about it. One of the things we want to do is do another self-assessment where you're looking at your preferred conflict management style. Those styles are basically these. You have forcing, avoiding, accommodating, compromising, and collaborating. Forcing is basically where you're trying to use aggression to try to get the conflict resolved and get your way. In other words, I'm going to win and you're going to lose. It's appropriate to use if it's about personal differences, if there's a situation of values or ethics, or you need a resolution done right now and you don't have time to figure it out. Avoiding is basically, I lose, you win. It can help keep relationships, but you don't get anything resolved. It can be useful and appropriate if you don't have a high stake or you don't really care about the situation. All right, go ahead and let them go. If you maybe you don't have time to deal with the situation, go ahead and avoid. Accommodating is basically saying, okay, I'll give a little bit in there, all right? I will give in a little bit. You try to get it done, but you find out, it's not worth it. And then you go ahead and back off. So there is an appropriate use for accommodating someone. Compromise is basically where everybody gives a little bit up. All right, you can get things resolved more quickly, but you really may not have the best solution for the long run. It is appropriate to use when, first of all, the other person just doesn't want to play. So you might have to compromise. Maybe everybody has strong interests and maybe time is short. So you kind of compromise, everybody gives a little bit up. The best is collaboration. In other words, what you're trying to do is solve problems. It's a problem-solving style, and you're trying to find the win for both parties, for you and for the other person. It's going to take a heck of a lot more time to do it. You use this when you're trying to keep the relationship strong, you have time, and maybe you have your conflict between peers. There is a difference between compromise and collaboration. In compromising, everybody gives up a little something. In collaborating, what you're trying to find is, what is that third alternative? Each of you have one alternative. I want this, you want that. A third alternative is the one that meets the needs for both people. We need to use a collaborating style whenever we do have that conflict. The way you do that is start off with utilizing the XYZ model. And that's the way you approach it, the things that you say. You express the behavior that you saw. You don't make it personal. Here's the behavior. Here are the consequences of that behavior, and here's how you feel about it. The book has various examples in there. Go back and check it out. You want to think about your plan and implement that persistently, all right? When people are approached properly, with respect, and with that kind of XYZ approach, they're much more willing to be open to having some sort of change, or at least listening. You can't resolve the problem unless both parties agree that there is one to solve. You have to find out what is the key problem that's actually going on there. Try to agree on the specific actions that both will take. In other words, we had a conflict, we had a disagreement, we've talked about it. All right, so you're going to do this and I'm going to do that. Is that right? Remember, conflict isn't collaborating is not forcing, okay? It's getting a commitment while both will agree by it, abide by it. If you have some sort of a conflict resolution, you're trying to work this through, listen and paraphrase, okay? Use that XYZ model. Agree with some part of the problem. There are things that you can agree on. Find something that you can agree with. Start looking at alternatives and make an agreement for change. And sometimes we do need to apologize. Now, it doesn't mean that you say that you're actually wrong. Maybe you're sorry that the other person is upset about this. Finding something to apologize for, something you agree with, is going to be important. If you have a situation where you're trying to mediate conflict between two people, one of the things you want to do is if you're getting in the middle of that and mediating it, you want them to express their point of view to their satisfaction, and you want them to have the other person express their point of view to their satisfaction. So, for example, if you and I have a conflict, I get to express my point of view, you don't interrupt, and then you have to repeat back or summarize my position and my situation. Then I have to listen to you. and you express your point of view, and I need to be able to express it back to you to your satisfaction. You agree on the problems, find different solutions, and then make an agreement. The situational viewpoint really does say that, all right, it depends on the needs of the people at that point in time. You're not going to be able to find a resolution for everything at all times. All right. You also have another self-assessment, 5.4. Go ahead and complete that. Give you a little bit more background on your preferences and things. So that's it for this chapter. If you have questions, give me a shout.